Hello, Radiant One, and a very big and a very warm welcome to Mastery, the show and podcast for brilliant spiritual beings just like you, having a human experience ready to ignite the mastery inherent in you, as well as grow and expand from within and wanting to lead with love in work, business, and life. Designed to activate the mastery already within you, here we merge the worlds of seen and unseen, magic and miracles with the mundane and the practical, spirituality with strategy, the energetic with the physical, and business, work, and life with a whole lot of love and soul. I'm your host, spiritual business coach, business developer, and radical love rebel Maria Serafina. And it is my deep honor, my great pleasure, and joy to share this episode with you. I serve business owners and leaders wanting to learn and be supported as you navigate leading with heart and soul. I do that through the Spiritual Leadership Academy, the Spiritual MBA, and one-on-one spiritual business coaching full of intuition and energetic alignment. You can find out more about everything on my website, mariaserafina.com. Having been called to this show and podcast, it is my strong guess that mastery is already inherent within you, Radiant One. If you'd like to expand and amplify that mastery, download the Mastery Activation I've created for you. Originally released within my paid membership, The Elevation, I've now made it available to all. Go to mariaserafina.com/MA or click the link in the description to receive it. Remember, if you enjoy Mastery, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, share, or leave a review to amplify the energy and love being shared in these transmissions so they can reach more and more gorgeous radiant beings like you. Today I'm joined by Ben Stimpson. Ben is an integrative therapist, spiritual director, award-winning author, podcaster, and independent scholar of folklore and history. A member of the modern neo-pagan and queer communities, Ben's personal life helps to inform his professional and research work. As a therapist, he excels in working with members of the queer community and other marginalized populations, and ascribes to transpersonal, systemic, and narrative approaches to therapy. He's the host of Essence Podcast, which I'll link to on my website, a weekly show interviewing fellow authors and practitioners in the field of alternative spirituality and therapy. His debut title, Ancestral Whispers, A Guide to Developing Ancestral Veneration Practices, was released by Levelin Worldwide and won the 2024 gold medal at the COVR Awards. His second title, Wise Ones, Legends of Witches, Magicians, and Cunning Folk of England and Wales, is set to debut in June 2025. What I love about Ben's work is that it is, as you'll hear, very inclusive in nature, creating sacred spaces for people who might not feel welcome in traditional therapy settings, and as such, is fostering healing on both an individual as well as collective level, because the more of us healing, expanding, and growing, the better our world becomes. I noticed Ben posting in a Facebook group and was called to reach out and see if they'd be willing to sit down for a sacred conversation about their own personal spiritual journey. We're all blessed that he said yes. Here is our sacred conversation. Ben, welcome to Mastery, and thank you for saying yes to joining me in sacred conversation. I am thrilled to see what's going to come through because we actually don't know each other.
No, we don't.
I was fortunate to see you drop in. You're a podcaster yourself and an author, and we're going to talk. You're going to be sharing lots about that. And there was just something about you that drew me in, and I was like, I want to have a conversation with this person. So would you start off by introducing yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, thank you for reaching out. It was delightful to receive that, and I'm glad we could work it out. So I'm a podcaster, as you said. I'm a therapist also. I'm an author in the metaphysical pagan witchcraft niche. I'm a spiritual practitioner, and right now I'm also caffeinating, which is a good thing too. So I'm a caffeinated person, but I'm located in Canada. I'm originally from the UK, and as of 2025, I'll be back in the UK again. So, so it's cool to get somebody from Europe reaching out to interview me.
Oh yeah,
which is
maybe
good.
that's the whole reason. Maybe that's the whole reason I reached across the pond to just grab you and pull you back to the so well, how did you like where because again you said like you mentioned you're a therapist and also a spiritual practitioner. You mentioned the neo-paganism and the Wicca and all that sounds so delightful and so interesting. I want to know how did your own journey start? Like your own journey with
Yeah.
spirituality, how did that start if it started in this lifetime? Like how did it start? Tell us
Mhm.
everything.
Well, it's funny you say that. I do think that it started in a previous lifetime. I am a believer in reincarnation. I do believe that I'm on a journey, and this is just one chapter of that journey. This particular chapter of my journey started in the UK. As I said, originally from North Wales,
Mhm.
and I think in a way it actually started as a reaction to emigrating to Canada. Actually, it was a very um, it was a very traumatic process for me emigrating to Canada. I was 8.5. I've talked about this on other podcasts too, and I've talked about this in my own work. That removal from my home, the place I
Mhm.
came from, what was familiar, everything was different.
Yes.
And even in physicality, like everything in North America is so much bigger. And for this little tiny little person that I was, it was
Yeah.
really overwhelming, and so I really clung to or tried to cling to. This was in the mid 90s. Really
Yeah.
cling to anything from home, and one of the pieces of that was
Yeah.
mythology and folklore. And mythology and folklore was saturating and is saturating British culture. Like you turn on kids' television. Same with Europe too. When you turn on kids'
Yes.
television, and it's mythology and folklore and
Mm,
everything of the main storylines. So
mm.
I really connected in with stories of Robin Hood, stories of King Arthur, stories of Avalon, and just the kind of mythic version of Britain.
Yes.
And as that progressed, that interest really grew, and then I suddenly found kind of neo-paganism and Wicca. And I
Yeah.
was like, I was never a Wiccan. I'm not initiated Wiccan, but that was what was proliferating back then. And I thought, how cool is this? This is actually people practicing what's in my storybooks. And I was like 13 at the time, so I didn't quite clue into like deep spirituality, but it kind of grew from there. And I met a load of people in my teenage years, mostly online, mostly connecting online.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, many of them I've actually reconnected with because eventually they became pagan authors years later. So it's always neat when I meet somebody who's an author in my publishing field or with one of my publishers.
Mm.
And it turns out we chatted when we were like, 20 years younger, right? So it's kind
Aw.
of a neat thing that, yeah.
The
Um,
connection. Mm.
the connections, exactly. And it's funny because that piece has kind of found itself again and again and again throughout kind of my spiritual journey. I'm a big fan of, and I think people in Denmark or people in the Low Countries that will know this word, weird. I don't know if you've ever
Yes.
come across that.
Oh, the runes? Yeah.
The runes,
Yeah.
yeah.
For
So
those who are listening, Ben was just showing us a tattoo on his arm. Oh, on their arm, sorry. And you said it was it weird? Is that what you call
that's weird, exactly.
it?
Yeah. So it's a Scandinavian Norse concept of fate, and it's very different from kind of a Christian concept of fate, which
Yes.
is there's one being kind of overseeing everything. Weird and Urt is this idea that the world is constantly unfolding. We are a thread connected with many other
Yes.
threads that
Yes.
interweave. And I found that throughout my life, people have come into my life when I was younger, and then through weird means, they've come back into my life years later. And that's how I see my life. Everything's integrative. So when I meet somebody and they go out of my life now, I have that sense of, oh, they'll be back. They'll be back at some point, and often they do, right?
I love that you share. It's so poignant because right now I've just realized that I am at the end of a dark night of my soul, and
Oh,
one of the pieces that are I am experiencing or is being highlighted has to do with integration and weaving. So I've always about my work said that I am weaving the worlds, and
mm,
this dark night has been a redirection even deeper into the weaving. So I love that you're sharing the weaving, because I always think of our lives as a tapestry, right? We're always weaving, and oh wow.
Always
Okay.
weaving. It's
All right, I
always
cut you off.
weaving,
Go ahead.
right? Well, but no, it's fine. That's a really important point, right? I think when people are able to come through that place of adversity, and I've certainly been there, right? When we begin to understand that it isn't
Just
some
one
remote.
second.
Oh, are you okay?
Sorry about that. I caught something in my throat.
Oh no,
Go ahead.
you okay?
Yes, I'm okay. We'll continue. Go ahead.
So funnily, like perfect example right there, right? We often think of fate as, predestined and things like that. Fate, as I see it, and as many other people see it, is what is happening now because of what happened in the future, in the past, that
Mm,
will affect the future, right? And that's a sense of empowerment. It is very easy for us to just throw our hands up and say, "Oh, it was fated. We don't have any free will in this."
yes.
Scandinavian point of view was very much. Um, and this is where heroism comes in. This
Yeah.
idea of heroism standing up to whatever is coming at you is
Yeah.
that what is happening now
Yeah.
came from what happened before, but is determined by what you're about to do. So for you, choking just then, right? You took a
Yeah.
drink, right? If you
Yeah.
hadn't taken a drink, you wouldn't have had that, that situation, right?
No.
But you rebounded. You were like, it's okay, I'm fine. I'm like, and you could laugh about it, right?
Yeah.
And we carried
Yeah.
on. That is a perfect example of how life is, right? I think
It's
people
so
often
beautiful.
get lost.
Because I share, like before we started recording, one of the things I share with you is, and this episode will probably be up by the time yours is up, is how I did a recording with someone who hadn't realized that it was also going to be on video. And so she was biking through the city of Copenhagen. She got pulled over by the police, and everything is recorded. And I'm probably not going to change any part of that, because I just like it is, I roll with it. Okay. So one of the questions that's coming up for me is, with the transition that you did and moving to
Mm.
or immigrating to Canada, I suppose there were so many mm, lineages that you could have been curious about or interested in. And I don't know why I get the sense that there's something earthly, like when you were talking, there was something about very grounding about it being, British folklore and Norse and
Yeah.
pagan and all this, um, sort of like a continued thread back. Is that how
Mhm.
you experience, or even if like maybe you didn't experience it but see it in hindsight? How do you view that?
No, it's completely spot on. It's one of the book that I just came out with last year
Yeah.
is a book on ancestor work, and it's like connecting in with the ancestors, but
Oh,
expanding the concept of ancestor. And we often think of ancestor as being just biological parentage
yes.
and lineage that way. But
Yes.
ancestor, when we really look at it, is anything or anyone who contributes to who we are. And when we expand it that way, it includes things like homelands. It includes saints. It includes lineage. It includes, affinity ancestors, even fictional characters that we really connect with and
Yeah.
who carry throughout our lives, right?
Yeah.
With me, particularly, my spiritual journey has kind of taken me all over the place. I've explored Hinduism, and Hinduism was really important to me, and still is in some ways.
Okay. Yeah.
I fell in with an Afro-Cuban tradition, Lukumi, which is Santeria, and for many years I was connected with that tradition. I was also connected in with a side tradition connected to it called Espiritismo, which is Cuban Spiritism,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, I was kind of going all over the world and really connecting in with deities and spirits and whatnot that spoke to my journey and kind of I recognized in my life.
Yeah.
And then when I really thought about, okay, I want to return to the UK, what is drawing me back? Because I've always wanted to go back. I've always wanted to live there again. I never really connected in with Canada as a space. Um,
Okay.
And even now, like I drive through my hometown that I grew up in for like 25 years, and the feeling I get is, oh, it's you again, right? There's no familial connection to it at all. It's the
Wow.
weirdest thing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whereas the UK and it's funny because when I talk to people back home, because I've been really heavily connecting and trying to make friends, trying to make connections for myself over there, it's that sense of belonging. And I don't know what that is. Like I can't even say kind of what it is.
Mhm.
There's a lot of pieces to it. And people who, it's not a blood relationship to the landscape, it's a home connection to the landscape,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I know British people who grew up in Canada and
Yeah.
this is home to them. They've really connected with this place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
You never put down
so
roots, so to speak.
yeah, but I
You,
have noticed on my spiritual journey, oftentimes the kind of places I connect with, or with beings or spirits that I work with, they often speak to my kind of bringing in reincarnation again, my lifelong and maybe multiple life journey. Of things I need to learn. So in this life, one of my biggest traumas was around control. I didn't get a chance to control whether or not I went to Canada or not. I
gotcha.
was 8. I didn't get that choice, right?
Hmm.
And control has come up again and again. So go figure. Some of the deities that I work with are deities of transaction and control. One
Oh,
of the major deities I work with is Hermes, the Greek Hermes, who is
yeah.
a god of transaction, a god of money, a god of change, a psychopomp, but also a god of communication. Go
Yeah.
figure. I trained in social work and I'm a counselor, right? So it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. 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 And the different I don't know if you want know if I want to call it religions or the spiritual lineages that you
Hmm.
explored, all of them are multifaceted and all of them are, I would say, sort of open. They're not like preachy, like, some other religions
Yeah,
are only one God and only like, and you need a priest and you need someone to communicate for you. So it seems as though they were all open to different interpretations and exploration within. Does that make sense? Like,
no, it makes total sense. Yeah,
yeah,
that's absolutely spot on. And like there is a certain element of an organic process that goes on with spiritual traditions,
yes,
right?
yeah,
Same with culture.
yeah,
I think when you really look at history, and I'm a historian and my BA in it,
yeah,
you see that many of these traditions have adopted and adapted and assimilated. The
yes,
Caribbean is a perfect example of that. You
yes,
have all of these different disparate
yes,
people from Africa who were brought
yes,
over as slaves, and they
yes,
coagulated into communities. Their spirits came with them,
yes,
and they formed traditions, right?
yes, yes,
I think this is why, particularly in my kind of metaphysical niche, you see a lot of people who are very interested in folk Catholicism as
yeah,
an ancestral thing and something that is
oh,
more affirming, because folk Catholicism, as opposed to state Catholicism,
yeah,
is very much more kind of taking in and adopting. And yes, there's some assimilating going on there, but
yeah,
I look around the UK, for example. You
yeah,
have practitioners where, wells that were connected to pagan deities beforehand were
mm,
connected with saints after that. And
yeah,
then when Protestant came in, they were thrown down or
yeah,
destroyed or whatnot. There's
yeah,
always been that element of then that folk culture going back to that well
yeah,
and respecting both figures that are connected with it, right?
yes,
And
yes.
there's no conflict with that. And I think
No.
that's a cool thing. Yeah.
And I think that, I have had a podcast named The Magdalene Voices where I explored a lot with Yeshua and Mary Magdalene and that
Mm.
time and all of what I have learned and experienced and has always had to do with, love being the way. And it's never
Mm.
been divisive. It's always been
Right.
inclusive. It's always been, yeah, choosing love as your way. And so, um, I have a ick or ish with I suppose
Mm.
the organized religions because I see it as for a large part being very divisive and very non-inclusive and I
Yeah.
and exclusive and I don't get it when you go back to the root of of it. So, but that's a whole nother story. One of the things is like, one of the things that's coming up is like, I think it would be interesting for us to do another sacred conversation is like in a year's time, once you're
I
back
would
and
do.
settled in the UK to like sort of
Yes,
see what that transition would be like for you
I would
spiritually.
love that. I would love that.
The question that's coming up for me is because you mentioned how originally when you first started, this was, online communities and this was can you tell us more about that? Because I think that that's really, that's one of the beauties of, the
Of
interweb
course.
and the net. And also like we're connected, like you're on the other quote unquote side of the world. I'm here in Denmark. We're
Yeah.
recording this and then we'll be sharing with people across the world. So those are the beautiful things of the internet.
Yeah.
And I think that, could you share more about how you found your way into those communities and what they gave
Yeah.
you and yeah.
Of course, definitely. So, when I was just starting to come onto these message boards, it was 20 years ago. It was the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I think I signed up to my first message board, Mystic Wicks, in 2002. So
Yeah.
I'm dating myself there, but what it did was it gave me a place that I could escape my life from. I
Gotcha.
was living in a very small town. I was queer. I was
Yeah.
just coming to realize that I'll come out.
Yeah.
And it was like, my high school had 1,000 people in it. Most small high schools in North America have 2,000,
Oh,
right?
oh,
It's a very small community. I grew up in a town of 500, which was 10-minute drive outside of a town of 8,000, right?
okay.
Tiny, tiny community.
Got
And I didn't felt like I didn't belong. I didn't have any friends. So I was spending a lot of hours on AOL back in the day, right?
it.
That's when the internet first came into our house was 2001. So it became a niche for me to connect, to find
Yeah.
support, to
Yeah.
express all of these ideas that I was learning. I was learning so much on these boards.
Yeah.
What I realized though is that paganism for me, spirituality for me back then, was an immature spirituality. I didn't
Hmm.
take ownership of it. And I think this is a very common thing. I
Mm,
think that people eventually get to a place where, spirituality or spiritual traditions, whatever it is, they become something more than just spirituality. They become, as I said, for me, it was safe harbor. It was
mm,
a community space. It was a place
mm,
of connection.
mm.
Um, and I think for me, it was really my mid-20s when I started to realize that there's something more and deeper going on for me here,
Okay.
right? It isn't just about having, sorry, go on.
No, because you said it was an immature spirituality. So what you mean by immature? Like not no
Yeah,
rituals
for
or
sure.
discipline, or like what you mean by immature? Could you
It
explain?
was that, yeah, it was that it was that tradition by rote, right? It was that
Mm.
idea of I need to have the right candle, I need to have the right incense, I need to pray this certain thing.
Oh,
It's
yes.
that dogmatic kind of
Actually,
very
yes.
two-dimensional thing, right?
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, yes.
With, of
That makes
course, definitely,
yes,
yeah.
yes,
Where's that emotional connection that, yes, it was
yes,
meaningful to me in the
yes,
moment, but that
yes,
meaning was very two-dimensional, right?
yes.
And
And
I think, sorry, go on.
I think that's like I just want to highlight that because I think that that's very poignant for even our time today, depending on where people are in their journeys, is that what you're essentially saying is that you don't need to have the right candle or the right stool or the right we think that we attach ourselves to outside materialistic things, yet it's the intention and the I suppose principle and energy behind it that is the practice or what.
I would say that, but
Okay.
it's the journey to get there, right? So
Yes.
I've like ritual is important. Like kind of having the right candle is important. Having the right incense is important, but not in the way that people often see it at first. And that's where I
Mm,
was at. I thought I put so much onus on having the right thing
mm,
because of this idea of orthodoxy, of
mm.
orthopraxy, right? It
Gotcha.
has to be this because there's nothing outside of this.
Yes.
When you settle into your mature practice, when you actually start to understand the deeper kind of
Yes.
relationships going on here, you have the power to then shift and change those things depending. So intention comes
Yes.
into it,
Yes.
but it isn't this is no longer important.
Yeah.
It's the what role is this? And as a ritualist, I really understand this. When I'm in ritual with a spirit,
Yeah.
that ritual is the form of communication,
Yeah.
right? Every element in there is a form of communicating to that
Yes.
spirit. So
Yes.
very important. But
Yeah.
when you've developed a relationship with somebody, right? You can use slang. You
Yes.
can, when you're with your best friend
Yeah.
and you don't need to verbalize everything in the same way you don't need the candles or the things to verbalize what's going on. You can create little shortcuts. You develop that relationship. And that's what I mean by a mature kind of spirituality,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And I suppose that's what I meant by my word of intention. But I loved how you expanded on that because, again, I think it's very important that
It
we,
is.
I don't want to say arrive at that place because it's also an ever expanding journey, I find.
Absolutely.
Uh, but I have in my journey found that I have had to detach myself from thinking that I needed this one thing in order to
This
be
is it.
able to
Yeah.
do this thing. And then, arriving at, like you said, because when you said like I don't know if what the word prayer is right, but the word that came
Mm.
coming up is like the energy of it. It's the exchange between
Yes.
spirit and matter that it was just I could just feel when you were talking, it was just filled with sacredness and divinity.
This
And
is the
that's
thing.
what I felt
Yeah.
when you were sharing. Um,
Yeah.
how did you, because this is now, as an author and as a therapist, this is now also part of your work.
Hmm.
How did you move? Well, I suppose, when did you realize, because you mentioned also being a social worker and a therapist, when did you realize that that was your direction in life? And how did you make the transition? Or even if it
Yeah, of
was a
course.
transition?
Well, going back again, everything's integrated. This is like it's step by step by step.
Yeah,
So in 2010, I was studying social work, and I ended up having to drop out of university for some mental health reasons. So I
gotcha.
ended up staying out of university for 5 years, and at that point, I was like, I don't want to go back to Toronto and do this, right? And that was what caused the issue in the first place. I didn't want to do social work. I wanted to work one on one with somebody,
Mm,
not go into a system where I would be a
mm,
band-aid, right?
mm.
So I founded a small vending company, started doing events and met some people, and they invited me to an event that they put on. It was like a summer camp for vegans. And what made this group special was they were using Joseph Campbell's monomyth as a form of creating a shared kind of story ritual throughout the weekend.
Gotcha.
So I went and we were assigned roles, and each part of the ritual was a part of this shared story that we were telling of the hero's journey.
Wow.
And I was chosen to take part in one of these rituals, and it became very meaningful for me because what happened was the fourth wall disappeared. It was no longer just reading the story, reading the folklore. It's entering into. It's like the theater. When you go to the theater as opposed to watch
Yeah,
something on television, you
yeah,
enter into that
yeah,
landscape of the theater,
yeah,
and there's an energy going on. There's an exchange going on.
yeah.
So that really inspired me. And then a few weeks later, I met somebody else who was doing personal development program, and she invited me. She said, "Would you be interested?" So I started going to this, and it's funny because the two streams started to overlap. She was part of that same community, not directly, but she was adjacent to it.
Yeah.
And that pushed me then to going and studying spiritual psychotherapy, which I ended up doing. It was a 2 year program, and spiritual psychotherapy, again, very holistic, bringing in these spiritual ideas, looking in more at spirituality as the whole body. So
Yes.
body, mind, spirit, and all of that. Using Jungian psychology, particularly
Yep.
transpersonal, a lot of like the kind of the chakra psychotherapy, for example. So utilizing spiritual kind of modalities as
Yes.
tools to go deeper into somebody's journey, right? And that was a really big thing. So I ended up going and I finished in September 2019. I had a small gaggle of clients. I was ready to go. It was great. And then what happened only 6 months later? So I
Yeah.
had a lot of time to basically do nothing. So I sat around and I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do with this? I developed a lot of ancestral work
Yeah.
within that program.
Yeah.
Around that time, I was also living with the priest who was part of the Lukumi tradition. A big part of that is ancestral work. And
Yeah.
so I developed a program for client, like therapy clients,
Yes.
on family trauma and exploring family connection. And I said, well, I have all of this material. I might as well try to write a book with it because I've always wanted to write a book. So 2020 to 2021, I wrote a book, submitted it, waited 8 months for the publisher to finally get back to me, and then it came out last year. So that was my entryway
Nice.
in this period. Yeah.
I'm noticing so you mentioned when you entered the message boards back in the early 2000s how it was sort of like it was an escape from your lived experience. And
Yeah.
then you mentioned how you entered university and had a health thing that pulled you essentially out of it. Um, and then you entered you know, this found its way into your life. And for some reason, I can see the threads in terms of this allows for you to actually transition back into the UK. It allows for you to make the move, I suppose, in a quote unquote easier way, even though it comes with a lot of different, like
It
there's still
totally does. Oh yeah.
challenges,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it allows for you to shift that.
I got really lucky, and I don't know if that's even a luck thing, but so in the UK, counseling is a very different thing from North America. North America, it's much expanded. Social workers are doing a
Yeah.
lot more than they normally do. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of counseling is also diagnosis, whereas in the UK it isn't. So the program I took, it had a very particular kind of criteria of layout. 400 hours of class time, 120 hours of face-to-face placement, supervision, and then personal therapy hours.
Yeah.
That was a very uncommon thing for Ontario training programs. And Ontario was just regulating at that moment. It's now a regulated
Yeah.
practice. And that particular program had to wait a few years to become part of a regulated body because they had to change some things.
Yeah.
What I trained with was exactly what the UK trains. So all of the training programs in the UK are a mirror image of not in content,
What?
but in structure,
Yeah.
right? So when I looked at it, and in the UK it's unregulated, I could just be practicing, but I do feel like being part
Yes.
of an association feels ethical to me. And
Yes.
so all of the
Yes.
three counselling bodies over there, and those are what that structure is what they require. So for me, I could just go and say, I've got this. Here's my
Beautiful.
certificate. And they just did an exam, so proficiency exam, passed it, and there we go. I didn't have to retrain. So
It
I was
doesn't
like, oh,
sound, it doesn't sound, I know, it doesn't sound like luck.
I
It,
know, I know, and I don't think so either.
it sounds more like one of those threads. Like I'm just
Yeah,
gonna be honest. Like it sounds more like one of those threads in terms of that because it's such a plug and play thing, I suppose. In terms.
yeah,
So how do you use because I noticed on your website you actually integrate spirituality and now I
I
know because
do.
based on your training into your therapy
Yes,
sessions. And also I just want to highlight that I'm going to be linking to your book and also linking to
yeah,
your site and all of that so that people can go ahead and find you and all of your brilliant
perfect.
things.
Thank you.
So that just know that that will be in there'll be a link and then you can find all the things. But how does that come into play? Because I and honoring
Hmm.
anonymity and client
Oh,
confidentiality.
totally, absolutely,
So
yeah.
how do you yeah, because I'm just quote unquote just a coach, but confidentiality for me is like
It's
everything.
huge. Absolutely, it's huge. Yeah,
Like I don't even one of the things that I have a really hard time with is when I see people just sharing, oh my God, I just came out of a session, this happened, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, did you get permission from your client to share that? Like
yeah,
I always I get goosebumps because I always ask for permission, even though quote unquote I am just a coach. And in Denmark,
That's the
there's
thing.
not really any regulations at all, unfortunately. Sorry. The question was, that was just like me going on a tangent because I'm so
No, I
like,
agree. No, I agree with you. There's a lot to that. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but it is interesting moving from a now regulated professional space, which has been
yes,
regulated for 7 years now,
yeah,
into an unregulated space with the UK,
yeah,
because there are all sorts of interesting, wild ways that ethics are bended over there.
yes,
But that's a whole other conversation.
yes, yes,
Um,
yes,
our work actually isn't all that different. Now, with coaching, you're looking for solutions, right? You're looking at strengths, you're looking.
yes.
What we both work with is narratives, both. And that's how I enter
Mm,
into. One of the big things that I use and how spirituality comes into it is spirituality becomes one of the narratives that we look at. What are the relationships that
mm,
my clients have with, gods, with saints, with deities, with spirits, whoever,
mm,
with each other? How
mm,
are those relationships forming narratives of the person? And
mm.
how are those narratives then impacting their life? So a
Yeah,
very classic example of this is Catholic shame, right? Or that
yes,
Christian, concept of I'm a sinner, right?
mm, yes,
How does that impact then their life in going forward?
yes,
Particularly if they come from a household where control and shame was really,
yes,
really pushed onto them, right?
yes. And I
How
suppose
that
also
can, sorry,
if they're queer like that, like it,
this is the other thing
I
too.
mean, even now I'm getting emotional.
Yeah,
Just the idea that you, based on what someone else is telling you, can shun your kids or make them out to be something that they're not. I just, it breaks my heart.
I
I
know.
don't understand how we can abandon
It's
our
it's it, this is
principles.
the
Yeah,
thing, and it's narrative, right? The narrative being that this person who I love, but who is doing something that I hate, right, is a threat to the metaphysical world, right? Is a threat to my worldview, and therefore they have to be shunned. It's so different from kind of how I live and how many people live, right? Uh, it's an issue, but it's a narrative, right? It all comes down to narrative. The people who used to believe that way, who have worked on that and kind of seen the light,
yeah,
they've come from a place of that social control and social need to punish what
yes,
seems like
yes,
deviancy to that
yes,
space of,
yes,
understanding that their own foibles, right? That they are sinners themselves. I don't agree with that myself on a personal level, but that shift, though, allows them to open up their empathy. Well, we're all sinners. We're all in this together. Therefore,
yeah,
so that spirituality piece coming into that, I tend not to focus a lot with Christians. I do tend to focus a lot more with pagans and queer spiritualists
yeah,
and expanding that out to people who are in geek fandoms, people
yeah,
who LARP, live action role play, people
yes,
who engage with the
yes,
theater, right? So when you
yes,
look at kind of the role of spirituality for most people,
yes,
that role is also taken up by other things. So I tend to approach it all narratively. I look at the story, I look at relationship. A classic example of this would be, I work with a lot of queer people, and in those spheres, depending on generation, comic book heroes or fandom characters,
yes,
geek-like characters, right, are very important. We
yeah,
look at people like, um, Star Wars, for example, right?
yes,
This
yes,
whole idea of the Jedi. We're looking at stories, and so then the work is to explore with that client, what is the narrative in the story that you're really connecting with, right? And what does that tell you about yourself? We use it as a way to go deeper into the client.
yes,
This particularly is true with paganism,
yeah,
because oftentimes what will happen is people that I've noticed is people will be drawn to deities and gods
mm,
that somehow reflect them, but
yeah,
they're unaware of that. They may be only semi-aware
yeah,
of that, right?
yeah,
So for
yeah,
me, for example, I really connect in with Shiva and Hermes
mm,
because both of those deities
mm,
are connected with that sense of control and communication and transaction, right?
mm.
Right. So there's a part of that story that I saw, you
I
know.
just, the magnitude of your work, like the healing power that it
Thank you.
has, is just, I mean, I fully get the connection to ancestry as well and to ancestors as well, like with the
Mm.
whole, and because the work, like what is that phrase where it said, like when you heal, you not only heal, like you heal generations forward and seven
Yeah.
generations back. And so with what you're doing and how you are truly transforming or helping a person transform their
Mhm.
lives completely by the release of that shame and that guilt, and I suppose the
Mhm.
embracing of, because I know that some of the, I suppose, I don't know if it's still as much today as it has been, like but like paganism or role playing or fandom has been very, I suppose, ridiculed in a way, like,
It has been.
yeah,
Yeah, it has
but I
been. It
find
has
that
been.
that seems to be less, maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe that's a reflection of me. Go ahead.
I think culture is changing. I think that a lot more people understand the power of it, and because they've experienced it,
Yeah.
it was ridiculed as dangerous because it was
Um,
a threat,
yeah.
right? It was a space that was not
Yes.
controllable,
Yes.
right? Fantasy and sci-fi is has always been a place of exploration, right? Has
Yes.
always been a place of exploring new
Yes.
potentials, and this is why so many, I would say, white supremacists
Yes.
and conservative types either hate it or have tried to infiltrate it to change it, because what it is it's narratives, it's competing narratives, right? The reason that so many younger people are so interested in fantasy, and older people who have been involved with it for such a long
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
is because it became a safe harbor for them to explore themselves in a way that was mobile.
Yes.
It doesn't take anything to read comic books. It doesn't take
No.
anything to, pull out a book and enter into that world. They
No.
became virtual spaces to explore
Yes.
and to shape, right?
And
The
as far
same way that modern spirituality is too, right?
and I don't, because I used to, like, this was years and years ago, I played World of Warcraft, but
Yes.
as far as I remember, like the many of the characters were quote unquote queer. There was no
Hmm.
like gender identity for them.
Hmm.
You could be
Yeah.
who you wanted to be. And if I suppose
Yeah.
if you're someone who's struggling with your with trying to conform or being controlled by,
Hmm.
entering the world of is a freedom and an escape. I can see
Very
how
much
that,
so.
and then
Very
that
much
can
so.
actually help you in your personal life as well. Because I know that there's like friends across the globe who have friendships that
Hmm.
have been formed by that.
Huge. It's
Yeah.
really huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a psychologist, Dr. Chris in I think he's in New York, but he's a gamer himself, and
Oh,
he came out with a book called The New Psychology of Gaming, and the entirety of it was a study on to really illustrate to his colleagues in the psychology world, that video games are not an escape purely, that video games are not a
mm,
kind of a compartmentalization, that they are virtual spaces that can be used to explore with clients
yes.
themselves. There's
Yeah.
a lot more going on when somebody is interacting with a video
Yes.
game, in
Yes.
the same way that somebody who is interacting with a book, somebody who is interacting with
Yes.
kind of play, like
Yeah.
play, right? It's the power of play.
Yeah.
And so all of these elements really resound very deeply within spirituality, like
Wow.
particularly the paganism, right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the people who are interested in fantasy and sci-fi and gaming and whatnot are also interested in magic and
Yeah.
manifesting and spirituality, right?
Yes.
And so there's a lot of crossovers. A lot
Yeah.
of those people happen to be queer. I like my podcast. We were talking before we recorded.
Yeah.
My podcast is I've got about 80 episodes up there now, I think, of pagan authors. Many of whom are around my age, many of whom I knew beforehand 20 years ago, and we didn't realize it. Many of whom have very similar stories, right? So they were the outcasts in their villages or their towns. They didn't have any friends. So what did they do? They explored magic, right? They were
Yeah.
watching things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Charmed or, any of these other, pop culture shows. And that drew them into kind of practicing and exploring. And now, 20 years later, they're sitting in this mature place of spirituality. They're using it to explore themselves deeper. So very integrative, right? And it's wonderful.
I love it. Because one of the things, and this we talked about also before we talked about a lot of things before we started recording, was how, and I've recorded another episode, and that will probably also be out before yours, about transcending the binary or moving beyond polarity. And one of the things that I've noticed in my own journey, so I identified as, woman and no, not he, she and her, and all those things however, in my journey, what I have found, as I suppose what you would call is mature more into my spirituality, is I'm also seeing how there is a transcendence of the binary. Like I'm not attached to the polarity of things. I can see both, quote unquote, both sides, unless it's hurting someone. I'm just being
Right.
and and one of my own, I don't know, theories, I suppose it is I think that queer people, who by the way have been around forever, is part of the quote unquote elevation, or the part of the healing of our realm, not by having to do things, but merely by existing, by showing us that this is normal. It's like who we are. And also because in your being who you are in truth, you also quote unquote demonstrate or show us that we can transcend the binary, that we can transcend the polarity. Does that make sense? Like I'm curious.
It does. No, it does. It's about possibility, right? So
Yes.
queer people, anybody who is other,
Yeah.
often challenge social norms that are just taken for granted
Gotcha.
by rote, right? So by posing a possibility,
Yes.
right, they
Yes.
suddenly become threats. We become threats, and this is, I mean,
Oh,
like, the women's movement in the 70s and 60s posed a threat to the status quo, and the same ridicule that was happening for feminists back then is
yes.
happening to trans people now, to
Yes.
queer people now, to
Yeah.
anybody else now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's about that shattering of those rigid structures. Now, that being said, how I see it is that those structures are rigid because people don't think really too much about them, right?
Mm.
They're just
Yeah.
taken for granted as
Yes.
being that's how it is.
Yes.
It's that kind of immature, it's kind of how I was saying about immature spirituality before. Right?
Yeah.
We have to have candles, we have to have this color, it has to be
Yeah.
this, it has to be that because
Yeah.
it has to be,
Yeah.
right? In the same way that in society we have to have these gender norms, we have to have these
Yes.
kind of these
Boxes that
set,
we put.
exactly, these boxes. We
Yeah.
have to have them
Yeah.
without asking why do we have to have them? What
Mm.
purpose do they have,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I and so many other queer people are not trying to destroy those boxes. We're just trying to create opportunities for other boxes, we're trying to expand them. Doesn't mean that we're taking them away. And what I've noticed is that a lot of cis women
Yeah.
who are threatened by trans people,
Yeah.
right, whether it be trans guys or trans women or non-binary people,
Yeah.
is tend to be people who they've identified their identity based on what society is saying a woman is, right?
Oh.
Right? That's how I've seen it, anyways.
Yeah.
Now, when that happens, you're essentially just saying, well, my whole identity is already in somebody else's hands, right? I don't get to define who my identity is.
Mhm.
That question of what is womanhood, what is masculinity, what is manhood, what is. I'll
Mm.
tell you, when so I came out as non-binary about 3 years ago, 2 years, 2.5 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Up until that point, I felt uncomfortable with wearing kind of male masculine clothing, right? Because I didn't feel like I could ascribe to that kind of narrative of what that looked like,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And because I'd been victimized by guys like that in my life,
Yeah.
I didn't feel comfortable kind of expressing myself. I didn't comfortable showing my body off. I didn't feel comfortable go figure, as soon as I clicked that, oh, I'm non-binary, suddenly I'm wearing my baseball cap backwards, I'm wearing bro clothing, I'm going to the gym, working out, right? Really typically masculine things. And
Yes.
I feel okay doing that.
Yes.
And I look good. I have to be honest, I look good, right?
Yay.
But it's that point of expanding it. As soon as I stopped caring about what society's saying I need to be or don't need to be,
Yes.
suddenly it was like, okay, I can just be comfortable being and
Yes.
defining that, right?
Yes.
You
Yes.
know.
And again, you meant I love and thank you for everything that you just shared because I think it's powerful. I've always shared about you show us possibility and also um for me the whole threat I'm like but it makes sense when you say it like if my identity was attached to a certain norm that of what society would tell me that I would have to be then that makes sense that I would could feel that I don't and I
Yes.
also want to highlight that for me it's not something that you as if you're someone who's non-binary or queer like it's not something you
Hmm.
have to do there's nothing
Everybody.
specific you have to do
No,
you just have to live your life to the fullest like that's what
exactly.
um in
Yeah.
terms of because it's interesting because like again for me this has been a journey and anyone who goes back through the episodes that I have on the masculine voices will know because I was talking a lot
Mm.
about feminine and masculine
Yeah.
not assigning them to a specific gender because I don't think that feminine and masculine but I'm curious about
Mhm.
your, because you're so wise, like I'm curious about your perspective on it because when I look at it from an energetic perspective, we
Mhm.
live in the world of duality. There is polarity, like dry
Mhm.
and wet and hot and cold and high and low. So there are
Mhm.
we do live in a world of polarity. However, oftentimes feminine is then defined as, woman or
Mhm. Mhm.
female, and
Mhm.
masculine is, and it's not like, again,
Mhm.
I'm someone who's been told that I have, masculine energy, and it's like, well, thank you. But
Right.
like um, so I'm curious about your perspective on do you still, as a non-binary person, do you still experience the polarities?
Mhm.
How's your, and I know that
Absolutely.
we're like a little over time, so I hope I'm not
Oh,
taking.
no, no, this is good. No, this
Good,
is a good
good.
question. No, I do like I think that there's a misunderstanding about what non-binary is, right? And
Okay.
it's that sense of, people are fearful that non-binary people want the binary to be taken down, right? Everybody should be non-binary because there's no such thing as women or male, no such thing as masculine or masculinity or femininity, right?
Yeah.
What it is it's understanding that if everything is a continuum, there
Mm,
is no one point which absolutely defines what masculine and what feminine is. In
mm,
which case, they're just kind of zones within the pool. But
mm,
that doesn't mean that there aren't other spaces within those spaces,
mm,
right? I
mm.
tend to look at it well, well, what do you call it? I use this word so often. Of course, in this sense, it goes the color wheel, the prism, right?
The what?
The colors, the
Yeah,
the color wheel. What do you call it?
yeah. The color.
The
Yeah, yeah.
color spectrum. There we go. Color spectrum, right? If we
Yes.
look at the color
Yes.
spectrum, right, you have light and you have dark,
Yes.
but you have then all of the colors in between that, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
if femininity and masculinity are akin to that light or dark, you
Yes.
also have, spaces that are not light or dark. They're in between. You
Yes.
also have spaces outside of that, right? So it's that ability to expand on and
Yes.
understand. I think the polarity piece
Yeah.
is we've ascribed it to masculine and femininity
Yeah.
because of that lens that we've had of women and men, right?
The lens.
If we
Yes.
had different language to
Yes.
understand that energetics,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be so caught up on that, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, because
Right.
like one of the things that I say is like I like to as we journey through life, for me, it's about lifting the veils so that
Hmm.
your vision becomes clearer and essentially like because that's the thing with the color spectrum or the light spectrum, as you say,
Hmm.
things can only be seen through various lenses. And so
Totally.
that makes beautiful sense. Okay, hold on.
Yeah, totally.
I have so many other questions. The one of the questions that's coming up for me is, what have you found to be like challenging in your journey, if there's anything? I mean, you've already shared stuff, but like, what have you found to be challenging? Yeah, that's the first question. And then I have another question.
Yeah.
And we're gonna.
My own ego. That's one of the biggest challenges for me. My own ego. Yeah. I found that, and I know it's weird to be admitting to that, but it's true. I found that when I have been sitting in a lot of insecurity because of narratives, because of whatever, right? Those insecurity pieces have often led me astray or caused me to see things in different ways that weren't necessarily true. Very good example of this is I've gone through periods of my life where I was insecure about kind of who I was or like how people would see me. And
Mm,
so,
mm,
I've often gravitated towards knowledge as being kind of one of my defining features, or I know stuff, right?
that's,
Might be because of autism, might be not, but we'll see. I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
But in times I've used that as a way of kind of hoping to gain entry into spaces, to be recognized. And oftentimes it's come across a different way. Or I've, sat in that place of like, oh, you don't know anything. I have a BA and I have all this information. No, right? And I then just get caught up in my own story, right? I start believing my own story, and that story often isn't a solid sense of self,
And how have
right?
you then moved through that?
It's been a trial and error of understanding when something is being reflected back to me as myself, like when that's being reflected back to me, and it's like, oh yeah, no, I hear what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
of
Versus,
doing the
okay, being
work.
something project and doing work, right? But
Exactly.
also that projection piece too.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes, me just being me, right?
yeah,
Right? Mr. Know-it-all, but Mr. Know-it-all in the sense of I actually know it, right? That sense of then having some insecurity projected at me from somebody else's insecurity, being able to differentiate those has been a big thing. And it's a trial and error piece, right?
yeah,
I think that I've gone through periods of my life where I've actually heard like almost heard myself speak. And
yeah,
it was like, what are you doing?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
What are you doing?
yeah,
Right? I think what has helped is actually stepping into being an author and stepping into suddenly having a voice in these communities. I
yeah,
remember last year I was teaching a class on something, and one of the people who came in had bought my book, and I'd vaguely known this person online, and we were in the class, and I could tell that he was enraptured. He was actually listening to me, and at that moment it was like, I actually have somebody who's listening to me. I need to be very careful with this person because, I like they're giving me that attention. I need to be responsible here. And I
yeah,
think that responsibility piece maybe was lacking in previous times in my life. So stepping into that responsibility of knowing, okay, it's not just about my journey anymore. I now have a voice. I need to be a lot more responsible with maybe what I'm saying, maybe not allowing my bitterness to come out in some ways, but also realizing that they're also where I was at and am at, and I need to respect that, right? So I've
yes.
learned a lot around that over the past few years.
Wow.
Not that that was lacking before, not, but at
Yeah,
times it was not underlined for me, right?
yeah. No, but I think
Yeah.
that we like, and again, that's the beauty of life. It's an ever expanding journey. And
Yeah.
we continue to have veils being lifted. Like I shared, like I just a week from recording this, I realized I was writing an article about dark nights of the soul. And as
Mm.
I was listing the symptoms. I was like, hold on.
Ooh.
I was like, check, and I'm like, watch me,
Yeah.
that's what's been going on. And I realized
Yeah.
that, and it was like, and I share that again, and I thank you so much for sharing what you just shared, because I think it's really important that we as healers or space holders or coaches, therapists share that we are still on our journeys. And I don't
Yes.
like the whole idea of like getting to the end point is like taking off and saying, "See ya, suckers! I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm ascending, and then I'm leaving this planet." I don't think that's why we're here. And you shared how you've come back again and again to be part of the solution, and that's what I see as well. It's like we come back to be part of the solution for the like
Yeah.
I call it the elevation of the frequency and the vibration of our realm.
Mhm.
And I think that's why, yeah, that's why we keep coming back. The final question that I want to ask has to do with mastery and how do you view mastery? What do you see mastery as, or if you ever even have any um, words about mastery? I know this is like an out of the blue question. I didn't warn you
No,
about
it's
it.
a very good. No, it's a very good question. And kind of multiple ways I could answer this. I once thought that I knew it all, and then I was a master, and then I realized I wasn't.
Yes,
And in stepping into that knowing I'm not, and that responsibility piece rises, I
yes,
realize that I might be a master of something and not a
yes,
master of everything. And I
yes,
feel like a lot of people feel, especially nowadays, especially with the corporatization of spirituality,
yes.
I feel like a lot of people feel like they have to be a master of everything in
Mm,
order to gain clients, in order to gain money, in order to gain
yeah,
self-esteem, or whatever it is,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I do what I do.
yeah,
Sometimes I stumble, right?
yeah,
But I think that, when somebody says I'm an expert on ancestor veneration, I'm not an expert, right? That feels uncomfortable,
yeah,
but that's a narrative that is being
yeah,
used in that moment.
yeah.
And so being conscious of whose narrative and what it's serving is
Yes,
is important,
yes,
right? Somebody comes to a
yes,
class because they think they're going to get something from me because I'm an expert.
yeah,
I need to be very careful of how I present myself in that.
yeah,
But that's part of their story of why they're coming, and
yeah,
I need to honor that there's a seed in that of wanting and longing.
yes,
It's not my place to cut that down and be like, well, I'm not a master, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
cause that person more doubt, but to help them to understand that I'm just offering one perspective, right?
yes. And also the beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I want to add that it's also, for me, it's about, owning the mastery, like you said, owning that I have this wisdom, I have this knowledge, I have this experience, I have not as much book knowledge as you do at all.
So,
I'm still, a master at what I do. And at the
exactly.
same time, I am still learning. I am still uh, doing my work. I'm still practicing every day. I'm
Mhm.
still walking my walk and talking my talk. Because
Yeah.
to me, and that's also essentially what I heard in what you shared. So it's
Mm.
more about being a little bit further ahead of someone, and then sh I don't want to say showing them the way, because for me it's like discernment is crucial for me. I think that a lot of times when we talk about quote unquote masters, like one of the things that I've struggled with is when people put me on a pedestal, exactly like you said, in terms of I did not want to claim the role of a teacher because I'm don't put me on a pedestal, because that's often what happens.
Yeah.
And often when people put you when you put someone on a pedestal, you place them, but it's above you, and then you don't see the light in yourself, you don't see the mastery in yourself, you don't see the expertness in yourself.
Yeah.
You project it out, and so I like
It
to
totally
reflect
does.
it back
It totally does.
and have that discernment of who are if you're listening to someone who's making you feel bad about yourself or trying to cut you off from your source or from whatever, like run, Forrest, run, like
Is that
just
it's
run,
true? No, it's true. Yeah.
because it's all about bringing you back into contact with your essence and your truth.
Some of the biggest disappointments in my life have been when a mentor turned out to be somebody who was just feeding off of that fawning, right? Some of the
Yes,
biggest disappointments in my life have been when I realized that I was playing a role I didn't sign up for with these
yes,
people.
yes,
And it happened recently, right? There
yeah,
was somebody who I worked with for a very long time, and
yeah,
I came to realize um, that this person intentionally surrounds themselves with people who are going to need them,
yes,
right?
yeah,
And when you don't need them anymore, then
Yeah.
you realize that their generosity was conditional the whole time, and that's disappointing.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Well,
an object lesson, you know.
I have had an experience like that as well. That was one of my rude awakenings. Was I had a very rude awakening where I realized that I had completely veered off everything that I had, all the values and my integrity and everything. I was like, I woke up and
Yeah,
I was like, what the fudge am I doing? Like, because I've just completely abandoned my own principles. And
yeah.
that took me, or has taken me, about 3 to 4 years to get out of. And that was
Wow.
only, not to get out of, but like to
To
restore, to heal
right.
from. Um, and it was also, I've realized it was also a way for me to see how good I am at what I
This is the
do. Does
thing.
that make
This is the
sense?
thing.
Like,
It makes total sense. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. When your gaze is so focused on the outside for
yes,
somebody who needs to be looked at,
yeah,
when you suddenly aren't looking at them, you have a chance to look in the mirror, right?
yes,
You have you have the ability to then start to feel the felt senses in you,
yes,
right? And start to inwardly look, right?
yeah,
Yeah. It's a huge thing. It's
it
a
is.
huge thing. Yeah.
And we could go on and
This is
on and
good.
on
I
and
love
on and
this.
on. Do you have any, like, do you have any final words or anything you want to share? Are we complete? Like,
I'm not sure. I will, you know what? I will actually say this. You know, a lot of people ask me, you know, tell me about your spiritual journey because I'm an author, right? And then, you know, even I have to admit, and I always admit this, but even my own journey is still going on. Just because I've written a book and I've talked about that, that's a snapshot of who I was. And my own journey is leading me in different ways too.
yeah,
So we're all on a journey. Um, and my sighs are deeper these days because of it.
yes, exactly. Then again, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
this was
for,
delightful. Thank you so much. And we must have that conversation in a year once I'm back in Europe. And I
yeah,
know Britain doesn't like to say it's in Europe, but it is.
we will do this in a year from now. And to everyone who's listening or watching, again, like I said, in the description, there will be links and everything so you can find Bend wherever they are. And yeah, just have a wonderful day wherever in the world you might be. That is what I have for you in today's episode of Mastery with Maria Serafina. I hope it served you well. For all the deeds and details, click the link in the description and help me spread the love of this transmission by sharing it with a friend or on social media, or leave me a comment or review. Have a wonderful day. God bless.